So listen closely, because what I'm about to share may forever change the way you understand your relationships, your life, and most of all, yourself. Perhaps you believed it was love. Perhaps you were certain it was destiny, that this person was your soul's missing piece, the long-awaited answer to the silent ache you had carried for years. You felt it not just in your thoughts, but in your body, in your skin, your chest, every fiber of your being. The connection was so intense, so undeniable, that it seemed to defy all logic. Everything appeared to align, until one day, it shattered. And you were left standing in the ruins of something that once felt sacred, holding a hollow ache that consumed you from the inside out. 1,000 questions swirled with no answers, and a silent anguish followed you like a shadow, the unbearable sense that you had lost something that should have been yours forever. But let me offer you a truth that few dare to speak, a truth that Carl Jung understood deeply. It was not your person, it was your mirror. What you saw in them, what you felt so powerfully, was the exact reflection of your own inner wound, your emptiness, your forgotten needs, your unloved self. They didn't complete you, they revealed you. They awakened the parts of you buried in the unconscious, the shadow aspects you had long disowned, the emotional absences you learned to normalize, the tenderness you silenced in order to cope. And this is the truth few are ready to face. Until you understand this, until you recognize the mirror for what it truly is, you will continue to call love what is actually the activation of your own emptiness. This article is a profound psychological journey inspired by the philosophy of Carl Jung. It explores why the people we believe are destined for us are often nothing more than perfect reflections of our inner fragmentation. They are not the one, they are the mirror of your disconnection from self, the symbolic echo of what remains unhealed within. And if this message is already stirring something inside you, if it feels less like an idea and more like a remembering, then I invite you to stay with me. What follows will not only help you understand why it happened, but will also guide you to break the pattern, not by chasing another person, but by returning to yourself, the place you were always meant to come home to. Subscribe now, not simply to hear another conversation, but to enter a mirror, a sacred space where the journey is not toward others, but toward yourself. What you are about to discover is not information, it is transformation. Because after this, you will no longer see your past relationships with the same eyes. You will no longer confuse intensity with truth, nor longing with love. And let me be clear, what you felt was real, the chemistry was real, the energy between you was real, the emotional pull was undeniably real. But what was not real was the story your mind built around that energy. It wasn't love in its highest form. It wasn't a conscious union. It was a sacred collision between two wounds that recognized each other beneath the surface. It was a dance, not of wholeness, but of lack. Two unmet needs dressed as soulmates. Two emotional absences that clung to each other, believing that closeness meant healing. Let me put it plainly, and with the honesty that leads to liberation. Your heart didn't attach to their love. It was attached to their wound. Because the unconscious does not seek love, it seeks familiarity. And what is familiar is not always what is healthy. Often, it is what reminds you of your earliest ache. That's why you felt such an intense pull toward them. Not because of who they were on the surface, but because of what they awakened within you. Their presence almost effortlessly touched the hidden corners of your shadow. With precision and uncanny timing, they stirred the very parts of you that had gone unnoticed, unhealed, unseen. What made you tremble wasn't them. It was the echo of your own unmet needs. It was the memory of emotional abandonment, the fear of not being enough, the hunger to finally be seen, understood, and loved, without conditions. And here, I'll tell you a truth that may sting, but in its sting is the seed of your freedom. Until you make your wound conscious, you will continue calling need by the name of love. You will continue confusing emotional hunger with divine connection. And as long as that need remains unconscious, your psyche will draw you, again and again, to the same faces wearing different masks. The same pattern, the same unresolved ending, different names, different smiles, but the same emotional script playing beneath it all. This is not a punishment. It is your soul's way of circling back to what still needs to be seen. The unconscious repeats what the conscious mind refuses to resolve. Jung knew this well. He taught that the inner wound will return as fate until it is brought into the light. So now the question is not why they left or why it ended. The real question is, what part of me believed that this was love? What part of me still calls pain a home? Stay with me, because the answers you seek are not out there. They are already within you, waiting to be remembered. This is not the end of your story. It is the moment you reclaim the pen. Does this feel familiar? Of course it does. And that is no accident. This is not my error. What you are witnessing is not fate, but deep psychology in motion, the unconscious mind pulling the strings from behind the curtain. As Carl Jung said so powerfully, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that is precisely what happened. You thought it was destiny. You were certain it was love. You believed this person was your soul's counterpart. But in truth, it was your shadow meeting itself. It was not fate. It was a psychological mirror. It was not deep love. It was emotional activation. It was not your soulmate. It was the perfect reflection of your emptiness, your unresolved longing, your unmet self. And now you ask, how could something that felt so real, so intense, so undeniably powerful, not have been love? Because here lies one of the most subtle traps of the unconscious. We confuse emotional intensity with genuine connection. We mistake anxiety for desire. We label attachment as chemistry. We cling to chaos and call it depth. Why? No one has taught us how to recognize love that rises from wholeness instead of need. We were never shown how to tell the difference between a bond born of consciousness and one born of survival. Let me take you deeper. Imagine for a moment that your heart is like a house that has stood silent for years, waiting to be inhabited. But within that house are cracks in the walls, rooms left in darkness, corners filled with dust, parts of yourself you never dared to explore. And then, one day, someone arrives. Not to live in the house, but to illuminate it. They don't do it intentionally, but simply by being there, they activate everything that was asleep. Their presence stirs the shadows. Where there was fear, more fear arises. Where there was emptiness, more absence appears. Where there was silent longing, it turned into aching need. And because we were never taught to interpret emotional activation, we call it love. This is where the illusion begins to dissolve, because once you understand that it was never your person, but your mirror, everything begins to change. You no longer chase what is familiar. You begin to question what once consumed you. You realize that what you loved was not the person, but the part of yourself that woke up in their presence. And from that awareness, a new kind of love can be born. Not a love based on lack, but a love anchored in self-acknowledge. So, don't fear this realization. Let it guide you. Because now you're not just surviving another heartbreak, you're awakening. You're starting to see through the emotional fog. And on the other side is a version of you that finally understands. The mirror was never the enemy. It was the message. And it came to return you to yourself. You begin to realize something that shakes the foundation of everything you believed about relationships. We do not attract what we consciously desire. We attract what we are, what we carry within the deepest layers of our psyche. And this realization is both humbling and powerful, because as long as there is inner emptiness, you will draw in absence. As long as fear remains unhealed within you, you will attract avoidance. As long as your sense of self is rooted in lack, you will encounter rejection, not because life is harsh or unfair, but because life loves you too deeply to let you numb your wound with fragments of affection that only mimic real love. And now perhaps you finally understand. The pain you felt was never truly about their absence. It was the reflection of your own abandonment. The wound wasn't their silence. It was your own inability to give yourself the love you were hoping they would provide. Their indifference was never the cause, it was the mirror, revealing your disconnection from your own emotional needs. That's why it cut so deeply. That's why it left you breathless. Not because of who they were, but because of what they reflected back to you about the relationship you've long avoided with yourself. So hear this with the care it's meant to hold. This is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of your return. A return not to someone else, but to your own soul. Because once you see clearly and understand the truth behind the mirror, you cannot go back to living unconsciously. You cannot continue calling. You need love or projection, destiny. Awareness changes everything. At the moment you stop blaming the other and start listening to the messages of your own pain, your entire inner world begins to transform. If this message is already echoing inside you, if you feel something old beginning to break open, something long buried beginning to stir, then stay with me, because what comes next will reveal to you how the mirror truly works. How the other person, far from being your source of wholeness, was always the perfect symbol of what remained fragmented within. And most importantly, you will discover how to break free. How can you dissolve this pattern that has held you hostage for years? Not through force, not through waiting for someone else to change, but by walking consciously toward the wound and choosing to become the one who heals it. And then, when you finally find the courage to look back with unfiltered honesty, not through longing, but through awareness, you begin to remember. You start tracing each detail with new eyes, every gesture, every silence, every word that once felt like love, but now reveals itself as a silent plea, a hidden cry for something you had never learned to give yourself. What held you there was never their presence. It was the echo of your own emptiness, projected onto them. It wasn't their soul you clung to. It was the illusion that they would complete what you had abandoned within. But why did it feel so true? Why did you believe they were your person? Because the connection seemed unbreakable. Because it felt destined, fated, written somewhere beyond reason. And this is where the unconscious works its most masterful illusion. It has a way of disguising emotional hunger as love, of wrapping need in the fabric of synchronicity. When two inner wounds recognize each other, the pull is magnetic. It is not random, it is not a coincidence. It is emotional chemistry, the collision between two voids seeking the same validation. Think about it. From the very beginning, something felt overwhelmingly familiar. Maybe it was their eyes, the rhythm of their voice, the unshakable feeling that you had known them your whole life, even though minutes had barely passed. But that wasn't magic. That was unconscious recognition. It was your own hidden wound whispering, "This is the perfect person to awaken everything you've been avoiding." And here is where deep psychology becomes unavoidable. What you felt was real, but it was not conscious love. It was a resonance between complementary wounds. It was your inner lack searching for worth. It was your fear reaching outward, hoping to find safety in another. While you called it love, what was truly taking place was a silent exchange of shadows. Two psyches searching for completion through each other's broken places. Carl Jung spoke to this truth with piercing clarity. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This connection was not fate. It was a mirror, a sacred, necessary mirror sent not to fulfill you, but to awaken you. It was never about them. It was about what they reflected, what you were still carrying, what you were still seeking. And what are you finally ready to see? What you once called destiny was not a divine design. It was your wound, quietly steering every step. What you named a soul connection was the invisible thread of your shadow, reaching outward, finding in the other the perfect reflection of what remained unhealed within you. That is why it was so hard to let go. That is why it hurt so much when they pulled away, when they didn't respond the way your heart was silently begging them to, when they failed to choose you in the way you had imagined. Because what truly shattered you was not just their absence, it was the ruthless activation of your own inner abandonment. Their rejection pierced so deeply, not because of who they were, but because it awakened the oldest and most buried wound of all, the fear that you are not enough. And I say this with the clarity this moment calls for. Until you see this, until you feel it fully in your body and soul, you will remain caught in the same emotional cycle. You will keep searching for something outside of you that can only be resolved within. You will continue to repeat patterns that promise love but deliver confusion. You will continue to call emotional hunger connection, to call longing love, to mistake anxiety for desire, because emotional attachment is a silent thief. It wears the mask of true love, speaks in the language of forever, and convinces you that without that person you cannot breathe, cannot live, cannot be whole. But in truth, attachment does not bind you to them. It binds you to your own unhealed pain. And the deeper you cling, the further you drift from yourself. Because if you look closely, you'll see it was not them you loved. It was what their presence symbolized for you: validation, purpose, belonging, safety. But listen closely now. No one can give you what you have refused to give yourself. No one can fill a space you have left untouched. That is why every time they left, it felt like your world collapsed. Not because of their departure alone, but because they had become the emotional shelter in which you stored your sense of worth. And when they walked away, that entire structure crumbled. And this is where most people break. But this is also where a few begin to awaken. When you finally ask, why does this hurt so much? Why am I holding on to someone who cannot meet me? Why do I keep living this pattern again and again? That is the moment the mirror begins to crack. That is the moment the unconscious becomes visible. And when you finally dare to look within, you begin to understand. It was never love that kept you there. It was needed. It was the fantasy that someone else would complete the parts of you you had long abandoned. It was the illusion that rescue could come from the outside. But here is the truth, raw and freeing. It was not your person, it was your mirror. They were the embodied reflection of everything within you that still aches to be seen, healed, and embraced. And until you choose to do that inner work, life will continue to bring you mirrors. Some will arrive gently, others will shake you to your core. But all will come with precision, because life does not give you what you ask for. It gives you what you need in order to awaken. And when this truth finally anchors itself in you, not just in your mind, but in your very being, transformation begins. You no longer chase those who walk away. You no longer beg to be chosen. You no longer torment yourself with why they didn't love you as you had hoped, because you understand now it was never about them. The pain was never caused by their absence. It was the echo of your own abandonment, long before they ever arrived. And here, in this understanding, everything begins to shift. When the mirror breaks, you stop searching outward for what can only be found within, and you stop pleading for love. You begin to choose it, first within yourself, and from there, everything changes. And it is here, at this very threshold, where the truth begins to lose its disguise. It becomes undeniable, uncomfortable, yet deeply liberating. Because when you begin to understand, not merely with your mind, but from the depths of your being, that the other person never came to give you what you lacked, but to reveal what you refuse to face within, everything starts to make sense. Painful, yes. Disorienting, absolutely. But essential. This is the step most people never take, the mirror most are afraid to look into, because no one told you, and very few are ready to admit, that we do not attract what we want, we attract what we are. And I know, as these words reach you, something within resists. Your ego protests. That can't be true, I only wanted love. I wanted connection, understanding, safety. And that's true. But your unconscious speaks another language, one much older, one shaped not by your desires, but by your wounds. So ask yourself, if what you carry inside is fear of abandonment, who do you think you will be drawn to? Exactly, someone who, in one way or another, will leave, not because life is cruel, but because your wound is calling to be seen, felt, and healed. And if the story you carry is, I am not enough, the relationship that will unfold will echo that. You will find yourself again in a space where you are not chosen, not prioritized, not valued. Not as punishment, but as a mirror, as life shows you precisely, elegantly, relentlessly, what still lies unresolved within you. This is why emotional intensity is never proof of love. It is evidence of activation, clear, raw, inescapable. What you called magic was chemistry between unhealed parts. What you called destiny was your shadow writing its old script again. What you believed to be love was the ignition of your inner void. So now, breathe with me, because here comes one of the most uncomfortable truths you will hear today. Every time you admired something in the other, it was a quality you had repressed in yourself. And every time something in them triggered you, it too was a reflection of your shadow, what drew you in and what tore you apart. Both came from the same mirror. Carl Jung put it simply, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And this insight is as powerful as it is humbling, because now you can no longer blame. You can no longer say, they did this to me. What hurt you was never just them. It was what they awakened in you. So, pause. Breathe. I know this message is not for everyone. It is not for those who want comfort. It is for those who want the truth. It is for those who are ready to stop being victims of their relationships and become conscious creators of their emotional lives. If this resonates with your soul, if you feel something stirring, something remembering, then I ask you to share this, not for me, but for the millions out there who are still calling love what is actually the activation of a wound. And maybe, just maybe, this message becomes the seed of their awakening. Let us go even deeper, because once you understand that every encounter is a mirror, you stop asking, why are they distant? Why don't they choose me? Why do they run? You begin to ask the harder questions. Where am I distant from myself? Where do I ignore my own needs? Where do I abandon the very parts of me crying for care? And the answers may shake you, because if you've tolerated crumbs, it's because somewhere inside you believed that was all you deserved. If you've stayed where you were not chosen, it's because you hadn't yet chosen yourself. If you've chased love, it's because you forgot how to return it to your own heart. That's why I say to you with full clarity, it was never your person. It was your mirror. It was the perfect, precise, divinely timed embodiment of the very places within you that were crying out to be seen. And now, you are beginning to see. You understand why, even after they left, the pain stayed. Because the wound was never there, it was yours. It wasn't born in this relationship. It began long ago, perhaps in childhood, in the first moments you felt invisible, unworthy, unseen. So hear me clearly, until you make your shadow conscious, you will continue to meet your emptiness in others. You will relive the same cycles. You will keep calling love what is, in truth, the echo of your unmet self. But this is not about closing your heart. This is not about fearing love. It is about rising into a different kind of love, a conscious love, a love born not of need, but of wholeness. A love that does not ask another to complete you, but flows from the sacred truth that you are already complete. You came here not to be completed, but to share your wholeness. And once you understand that, everything begins to shift. The mirror no longer feels like a punishment. It becomes your teacher. You stop resisting what life reveals through others and instead begin using every relationship, every encounter, every emotional trigger as a sacred portal into your own healing. Stay with me, because what comes next is even more powerful. I will show you how the mirror, according to Carl Jung's philosophy, is not just an explanation of your relationships. It is the master key to break the emotional patterns that have kept you cycling through the same pain again and again. And here is where everything begins to make a deeper kind of sense, the kind that does not live in the mind, but lands in the soul. Because when you truly understand the law of the mirror through the lens of Jungian psychology, you realize that your life has not been a random series of events. It has been a carefully orchestrated theater of your unconscious mind, designed not to punish you, but to reveal you, to bring into consciousness what you once refused to see. Jung said, "What you deny submits you. What you accept transforms you." This is the essence of everything you've lived. What irritated you in others was your own disowned shadow. What dazzled you in them was your unclaimed light. What hurt you was the echo of an inner wound. What you fell in love with was the part of yourself you forgot, repressed, or never dared to express. The unconscious does not lie, it does not pretend. It only reflects. It is the most precise mirror you will ever encounter, and even though you didn't know it, you've been looking into this mirror all your life, staring into the eyes of others, believing you were seeing them, when in truth, you were seeing yourself. That is why their absence hurt so deeply. It was not the loss of their presence. It was the sudden exposure of your own inner emptiness reflected in them. Their silence didn't shatter you. It echoed the voice within you that you had silenced for years. Every time you felt ignored, it was the reflection of how long you had been ignoring yourself. Every time you felt unchosen, it was the universe showing you the part of you that had never chosen you. Every desperate cry for love, validation, attention was your soul calling you home. And yes, it is hard to accept. We were taught to look outward, to blame, and to hope someone else would save us. But deep psychology doesn't let you stay there. It meets your eye to eye and whispers, "Everything you see is you." So when they didn't choose you, it was life showing you that you had yet to choose yourself. When they rejected you, it wasn't cruelty, it was your own unconscious saying, "See me, heal me, love me." You've been waiting. The mirror is not a metaphor. It is a psychic law. Whatever resonates in you, admiration, anger, longing, frustration, is an aspect of yourself you've either denied or not yet integrated. The shadow you resist is yours. The light you worship is also yours. The more you reject it, the louder it returns. This is why the relationships that hurt the most are often the ones that reveal the most. Because the pain you feel is equal to your resistance to seeing what that mirror is reflecting. As Jung taught, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. That is the key. If you do not make your abandonment wound conscious, your life will be filled with people who leave. If you do not make your feeling of unworthiness conscious, you will repeatedly find yourself in second place. If you do not make your fear of loneliness conscious, you will attract relationships where you feel utterly alone, even in someone's arms. This is not punishment. It is the precision of the unconscious. What is not seen will be repeated. What is not healed will be relived. What is not integrated becomes a pattern. But once you truly understand this law, something breaks. And in that breaking, something frees. You stop seeing the other as the villain. You step out of the victim story. You stop saying, "They did this to me," and instead, you ask the only question that changes everything. What part of me created this? What is this mirror trying to show me? And that's where the magic happens. Because when you begin asking those questions, the power returns to you. You stop seeking outside. You stop begging for love, attention, or validation. You begin to realize the love you were so desperately searching for was never in them. It has always been within you. Forgotten, perhaps, but never absent. That is when the mirror becomes your guide, not your executioner. Because each time something in the other triggers you, you now ask, "Where am I doing this to myself?" Each time someone walks away, you ask, "Where have I been emotionally absent from my own heart?" Each time someone overlooks your needs, you ask, Where have I been neglecting my own soul? And this is the beginning of a journey that transforms everything. Because once you see, you cannot unsee. And yes, it is uncomfortable, it is disarming, it is utterly raw, but it is also the gateway to a freedom you never knew was possible. Stay with me, because what comes next is even more life-altering. You are about to discover what happens when you stop attracting from your wounds and begin creating from your consciousness. When the mirror shatters and the search outside ends, you will finally remember where the real home has always been, within you. Let me speak to you with the clarity this moment calls for. You no longer beg for love, you choose it. You no longer search for someone to complete you, because you remember now that you were never incomplete. You no longer wait for a savior to arrive, because you have become your own sanctuary. And this is where a new life begins. A life where your relationships are no longer the battleground of your wounds, but the sacred stage where your wholeness is shared, expanded, and celebrated. But let this be known, this path is not for those who seek shortcuts. It is not for those who want comforting illusions. It is for the brave, for the ones willing to meet themselves without excuses, without masks, for those who understand that true transformation is not external, it is internal. Because when you change, everything changes. So, if you are still here, it is no accident. It is your unconscious calling. It is your soul remembering something it always knew, but momentarily forgot. Stay with me now, because what I'm about to share is the closure of this journey. A reflection that, if fully integrated, could alter not just how you love, but how you live. When you truly see yourself without filters, you stop betraying yourself for love. You stop settling for presence that only soothes your loneliness without honoring your depth. You begin to feel what you once ignored. You begin to understand why the same story kept playing on repeat, because the roles were written by the part of you that still hadn't chosen you. Let me ask you now, gently but directly, how much longer will you wait for someone to give you what you haven't yet given yourself? Look closely. No one is coming. Not your mother to heal what she didn't provide. Not your father to fill the space his absence left behind. Not your partner to lift you out of the emotional well you abandoned yourself in. No one is coming, because the one who was always meant to come was you. And when you understand this, everything you thought you needed from others begins to dissolve. You stop chasing, you stop pleading, you stop surviving through the hope that someone else will finally give you what your own soul has long been asking for. But do not shame yourself for not knowing this sooner. We were raised in a culture of lack. We were taught that love must be earned, chased, and deserved. But the truth is far simpler and far deeper. Love is not something given, it is something recognized within you and shared with the world. So every time you clung to someone, it was never truly love, it was fear. Fear of meeting yourself, fear of looking into the mirror of your own reflection. But now you see that the fear was never your enemy, it was your compass. It was the guide that pointed you home, even when you resisted. And yes, it hurts. It hurts to realize that you placed your emotional survival in the hands of someone who was never meant to carry it. What you called love was often attachment, and what you called connection was anxiety in disguise. But this pain is sacred. It is the pain that precedes rebirth. The soul aches as it loosens the grip of its own shadow and begins to walk toward the light of consciousness. And this is where everything starts to shift. You realize that you no longer need to be chosen because you are finally choosing yourself. You no longer need to be loved to feel worth because you have remembered how to love yourself, honestly and unconditionally. When this happens, your entire life changes. The battlefield becomes a blank canvas. Your relationships stop echoing your wounds and begin reflecting your fullness. And the love that arrives? It's different. It doesn't cling. It doesn't control. It doesn't perform. It chooses. It meets you not to rescue you, but to walk beside you, soul to soul. Not to fill a void, but to celebrate your completeness. Because now you know The love you were waiting for was never in someone else. It was always within you. And that mirror, the one you once feared, was never a punishment. It was the sacred messenger. It was the exact reflection your unconscious chose to bring you home to yourself. So, let me leave you with this. The people who caused you pain were not villains. They were reflections. They were mirrors sent to reveal the parts of you that still needed to be seen, accepted, and healed. Every abandonment was a summons. Every rejection is a redirection. Every silence is a call to listen to your own voice. And here is where everything is redefined. Here is where you realize that life never betrayed you. The universe never failed you. Love never left you. It was all part of a greater design, the sacred return to the self. Jung spoke of the individuation process as not a concept, but a lived experience. A soul journey where what you denied once ruled you, and what you now accept becomes your liberation. Yes, it will ask you to let go, to release relationships that were born from your wounds, to surrender dreams built on illusions, to part with attachments disguised as purpose. And yes, it will hurt. It will feel like waking up from a dream that once felt like home, only to find it was never real. But that pain is not destruction. It is birth. It is the ache of truth breaking through the illusions. And when that happens, when you no longer need to be chosen because you choose yourself, when you no longer need to be saved because you know how to stand with yourself, when you no longer seek outside what only lives within, then the mirror has done its work. And what remains is clarity, power, wholeness, and a love that no longer begs but expands. A love that no longer fears but creates. A love that no longer waits but lives. And that, dear one, is when the mirror finally becomes light. And now, everything becomes clear, not just the pain, but its meaning. You see, it was never about them. It was never their absence, nor their rejection, nor their silence. What shattered you was not the loss of a person, but the reflection of your own self-abandonment. It was your soul crying out from within, begging you to look inward, to stop seeking outside what could only be created within. And here, at this sacred turning point, something irreversible begins. A truth dawns that changes everything. Real love is not something that happens to you, or something you stumble upon. It is something you build inside, brick by brick, moment by moment. Because when you truly integrate this, not as an intellectual concept, but as a lived, embodied truth, your life transforms from the root. You no longer walk through the world as someone incomplete. You no longer plead for love. You no longer trade your worth for crumbs of attention. You begin to live not from the wound, but from the wholeness that was buried underneath it. And this is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a new one. Written in your own voice, shaped by your own hands, born from the moment you finally chose yourself. You no longer accept what does not reflect your truth. You no longer compromise your peace, your emotional dignity, your sacred space, because you now understand that everything you once tolerated outside was a mirror of what you tolerated within. And so the mirror shatters, not to break you, but to set you free. You begin to treat yourself with reverence. You speak to yourself with kindness. You honor your inner world with presence. And slowly, the world around you begins to shift. Your relationships change, your energy changes, your standards rise, not from arrogance, but from awakening. You no longer vibrate at the frequency of scarcity. You begin to vibrate at the frequency of emotional abundance. And what once felt impossible begins to arrive. The ones who meet you with presence, the ones who choose you from wholeness, not from need. The ones who see you because you have finally seen yourself. This is the true alchemy. This is the real revolution. You stop begging for love and become love. You stop chasing and start creating. You stop asking to be chosen and instead choose yourself, day after day, moment by moment. And when you do, life responds. The universe responds. Everything begins to rearrange itself to match the frequency of the love you have become. So remember this, It was never your person, it was your mirror. The sacred reflection that revealed where you had yet to return to yourself. And for that, be grateful. Because without that mirror, without that ache, without that moment of breaking, you might have never come home. And if you've made it this far, I honor you, I celebrate you. This journey is not for the faint of heart. It is for the courageous ones who dare to look within. Who dares to start? Who dares to become? If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.